Hey guys. Well, it's finally here. Today we're checking out the 40th anniversary release version of the Blade Liger. We're going to unbox the kit, we'll compare it to a bunch of other stuff, especially the masterpiece models, and of course we'll also check it out in action. One quick note before we start, the unboxing is going to be a bit weird because my microphone played tricks on me, so I had to re-record my commentary. But anyway, let's get started.
Robo Shop.
Alright, let's talk size first. What you're looking at is the A3 sized cutting mat that I always use as a background for my videos, just to give you an idea, because here's the box. Yeah, it's bigger than that cutting mat by quite a bit, and I'll already tell you, as it'll turn out later, it is actually full, so there's a lot of stuff in this and it's pretty big. So if we take the measurements here, we have a little over 17 inches length, 44 centimeters. Width is 12 inches or 30 centimeters. And the side here, which I could barely fit into the frame, is a little over 5 inches or 12 centimeters. So it's a relatively flat box, but yeah, you'll be surprised when you get the package because this thing is enormous. Now on the front here, of course, we have this very unusual and really stylish looking sort of front downshot view of the Blade Liger. On the side we have a somewhat newly designed logo, the AZ-01 designation, and it just says Blade Liger, very sort of plain but also slick and really nice looking. Looking at this box, I was kind of wondering if this is really meant to be sold in stores because the front of the box just doesn't really show off what the Zoid looks like. It's more sort of a cool design based on a picture of it. And I don't know. If anybody lives in Japan, let us know if they're actually selling these off of store shelves. But it doesn't look like it's designed for that. It's really just designed to be a really cool looking box. Now on the back here we have this picture that you've probably seen in preview images of the Blade Liger all put together and stickered up. On the bottom we have the skeleton and the extra parts and the pilots. And the usual image showing that it walks and all of the gimmicks, you know, the opening hatches and the blades that extend. Alright, now let's get this open here. It doesn't have a lid that comes up like a Kotobukiya box with a flap on the side because it's a Tomy box. And then it has this cardboard insert that holds all the parts, and as you can see, yeah, it's pretty much full. Now I open the bag with the instructions first, and the first thing we notice is that we have this extra little paper here that just explains that the blades don't actually come on a sprue but in a separate bag and off the sprue because they're pre-painted. The stickers are pretty much your standard Tomy fare, I'm afraid, so they're pretty thick. A lot of them have extra clear plastic that you need to remove for them to look at least somewhat acceptable, and honestly you'll see later I didn't put a whole lot of them on there. While we're here though, let's take a quick look at the bottom right section of the sticker sheet because this is the interesting part. You see here there are multiple Guardian Force stickers, a full color version of the Helic Republic emblem, and also this red coat of arms that I have to admit I don't recognize. If anyone knows what this is, please do post it in the comments. Anyway, the rest of the sticker sheet is just standard NJR stuff, but I do think it's nice that they went the extra mile to include all of this and the new pilot figures. Now, the instructions of course have the same really nice looking box art on the front. And then we have a parts list. What's interesting is that it shows a couple of parts crossed out already, and as it turns out the sprue with the crossed out parts is actually not based on a masterpiece sprue, so I'm really not sure what that's about. And then the instructions are pretty much what you'd expect from Tomy instructions. There's always a new part that's added that's highlighted in blue, or sometimes the contact points and pegs are highlighted in blue to make things easier to read. And that's the little tool that you use to attach the hard plastic caps that this one comes with instead of the rubber caps on the classic Tomy kits. And it stores underneath the display base, as you can see here. Yeah, and that's it really. I'm not going to look at every single step in detail here, of course. And after the instructions, you have a couple of pictures that show gimmicks and the stickers. No clear instructions on where the stickers are supposed to go, though. And on the back, we have this artwork here from the touring anniversary exhibition and some extra stuff at the bottom. So let's do a parts comparison here. I have the instructions of the Masterpiece Saber Tiger, and then we can take a look at the two parts lists. First page, as you can see, looks pretty much identical. It has been recreated, but it shows exactly the same stuff. One thing that the new Blade Liger doesn't have is these two pieces from the Saber Tiger, which, to be honest, I don't even remember what those did. And then, of course, the sprues. You can see immediately is different. It shares most of the same parts, but they've been moved around, so this sprue has been redesigned from the ground up. But when I lay them out next to each other like this, you can see it's clearly not the same sprue. What it looks like to me is that the parts for the tail have been moved to sprue A, most likely because the tail's longer on the Blade Liger, but we'll check that out when we do the comparison photos, of course. The B sprues also, as you can see, are completely different. They seem to contain parts that have a similar function. These are these sort of kind of, I don't know, ring pieces that go around the leg joints, and these have had to be redesigned so that it actually looks like a Blade Liger, but of course in terms of function it's basically the same thing. And these two sprues are obviously the same, and then these two are the same, these two are the same, this one as well. So for the most part, you can tell that these two kits, they definitely share a lot of parts in common. Some slight adjustments have been made to the Blade Liger, but the inner skeleton, also as you'll see later, is basically the same as on the Masterpiece models. And then here on the next page, of course, we have the armor pieces, which unsurprisingly are different from the Saber Tiger. And then this is me basically realizing that, oh wow, the Saber Tiger instructions actually came with these black and white photos, and the Blade Liger now has these digital drawings, which is actually an improvement because they're much easier to read. And then looking at the first couple of steps of the construction, you can tell it starts very similarly with parts that don't look exactly the same, but construction is really pretty much the same thing as it was with the Masterpiece Ligers. And here, these two parts I was talking about earlier, you can see they look different, but they serve the same purpose. And there's also that back spine in the same image that, you know, looks slightly different, but ultimately, of course, it does the same thing. Now, let's get a look at the parts. The first thing we've got here is the display base. Nothing that interesting. There's a space there where the sticker for the name goes, and then you just pluck this thing on top of it, and that's pretty much it. There's another attachment piece that I'm going to show you later. And of course here on the bottom we have the little bolt tightening tool that you need to put the kit together. It's pretty nice that this stores underneath the display base, because I don't know about you, but with me, like, stuff like this, I always have a hard time figuring out where to store it, and then I eventually lose it. Next we have the two blades, which are, as per usual, packaged separately so that they don't, you know, the paint doesn't get scraped off. I quite like these. They're 100% recognizably Blade Liger blades, but at the same time they've been redesigned, a lot of details been added, and yeah, they look nice and dangerous, I think. And the paint is also looks really good. This is the gearbox. 100% identical as near as I can tell to the Masterpiece gearbox, except it doesn't have all the same movement and sound gimmicks, unfortunately. Now in this first bag of parts we have this sprue with a whole bunch of mechanical pieces that will go on the legs, molded in black plastic and looking nice and detailed, but for the most part these are just to make the mechanism work. Next is the silver sprue, also with a bunch of mechanical pieces. And then we have this, also mostly mechanical stuff, in sort of a very dark pale blue. That, as it'll turn out, will look very nice with the lighter blue of the armor of the Zoid. A lot of nice detail on this as well. Moving on to the next bag. Here we have these gunmetal gray parts, the boosters, armor pieces with like cooling holes drilled into them that will go on the torso, the cannon for the front, and a couple of other nice detail pieces. These are the attachment pieces for the blades, and it's kind of funny how they look almost exactly the same as on the Tomy. I mean, you know, the standard Tomy kit from the NJR. As it'll turn out, they will not end up with stress marks like on the NJR kit though. Next, we've got these pieces that have been redesigned from the Masterpiece version that I've talked about earlier. They look sort of flat and angular, but they do have a lot of nice detail on them. And I mean, obviously the general flatness is so that they don't interfere with the movement of the legs, so that makes sense. Now we've got what is probably the most disappointing part of the kit for me, which is that this is the gold sprue that, of course, you can tell these are all the claws that are going to go on the feet. And this is definitely not a nice metallic gold. If you look at, you know, how they compare to the painted sections of the blades here, it's number one, it's not even close, and number two, it's really kind of a Kotobukiya style stale scrambled eggs yellow here. I'm not a fan of that at all, and I was kind of hoping for metal feet, of course, but no dice. Then we have this white sprue with the armor pieces for the feet and sort of the white parts that go on the mane, and this little piece on the back here that goes into the wings on the tail. Here's the next bag. We've got this attachment piece for the display base, and then the clear parts. It's basically the pilot seat and the canopy. Very heavily redesigned from the original NJR version, of course. And I think the reason the pilot seat is molded this way is because the eyes are also molded into it, and those need to glow, so it needs to be in clear plastic. And then we have these 6 large caps that will hold the legs in place, so I think you actually only use 4 of them. A couple of mechanical pieces for attaching the claws together, actually. The pilot figures, this is Van Flyheit and Fiona. And more gold pieces, these are the teeth, of course. And good news, these parts actually don't look as crappy as the feet. All the more reason to wonder, you know, why they made the claws look this ugly though. But oh well, at least we get nice looking metallic gold teeth. Now, next bag, moving on to armor. These are of course all very recognizably Blade Liger armor pieces, although overall I find that they have more detail than the NJR, but at the same time they're a little less curvy looking, or at least it feels that way. But of course, you know, we're going to do a comparison shot with the original Blue Blade Liger, and then we'll see what it actually looks like when it's all put together. And here we have the head armor, the armor cover that goes on the boosters, bunch of parts for the main, all looking nice and detailed, and like I said, a bit more angular in my opinion than the NJR Blade Liger. And here we've got another batch of parts for the skeleton. As I'm sure you can tell, you've got the head here, you've got pieces for the legs, some other stuff. Super detailed, but also if you've built any of the Masterpiece Ligers, of course this is old hat, but you know, they do look nice. And I think this is the last bag. It's got some nice painted pieces inside. These are the medium size caps that you screw on to attach parts. These are the small caps. And then here we have these pistons that go on the legs that are painted silver. This looks very nice in person, I have to say. Hopefully it'll show up better in pictures. And these other piston parts that attach to the ones I just showed you, plus these mechanical pieces that, if I remember correctly, also have the painted sections on the Masterpiece models. Yeah, and that's pretty much it, so let's move on to pictures. So, I'll start this on a negative note with what is honestly my biggest gripe with this model. Most of you will probably have seen this promo picture that's also reproduced on the back of the box, and now this is what the Zoid looks like in real life. The proportions are very different to what the photo makes it look like, most notably the fact that the head is a lot smaller. I tried to reproduce the angle they took that photo from in my own pictures, but honestly I couldn't even pull that off. It just kind of makes me feel like they knew we wouldn't like the actual proportions of the thing and photographed it in a misleading way. Now, my first thought was that it's probably closer in proportions to the HMM version, and that's kind of true, as you can see here. That one also has a relatively smaller head, but also overall sleeker proportions, and so it never bothered me much on that version. And if you don't know what I mean, here's a comparison shot to the NJR version. Hopefully you can see what I mean here. The NJR's head is actually slightly bigger, even though the Zoid overall is considerably smaller. I mean, all this is no doubt the result of having to use the Masterpiece skeleton as a base, but the NJR Blade Liger was also constructed on top of the Shield Liger, and they made that work. So I'm really not sure how we ended up with this pin-headed version here. Enough complaining though. While I've got the NJR version in the booth, here's a look at the leg armor on that one. And the Anniversary version's leg armor. Definitely way more detail here, and as I said in the unboxing, flatter and slightly more angular surfaces, but recognizably the Blade Liger, and honestly I think it looks really good. Also, here's that top hatch that covers up the boosters, and here's what that looks like on the Anniversary version. Definitely a completely different shape, and it does help bulk up the proportions towards the front a bit. Oh, and since we're looking at that anyway, here's the boosters. These are sitting on a ball joint, so they can be moved in pretty much any direction you want. Now, here's a comparison to the Masterpiece Shield Liger, and this is honestly where the new Blade Liger really shines. As close as these are in construction, I just think the Blade Liger looks better, and these two actually do look like they're 7 years apart. And here's the Saber Tiger. If I'm perfectly honest, this is still my favorite of the three, but that's very subjective. I really love that dark red color, the translucent armor bits, and the Saber Tiger is also by far my favorite of all the big cats in Zoid's history, so yeah, maybe a bit biased here. Here's a close-up of the Blade Liger's legs and flank to give you an idea of how close this is to the Masterpiece models. And here's the Shield Liger, so you can see it's really more or less the same with a few minor alterations. In fact, as it turns out, that rib piece inside of the front legs is identical, it just looks different on the Saber Tiger. And before I show it to you in action, let's take a look at the other gimmicks. The cockpit opens like so, which I think is a really cool way to get around the fact that you have to fit Fiona into the back seat. The main pieces fold out just like they do on the NJR, of course. And you also get this extra bit for the top to build the Republic version, which I'm also a bit hazy about, but I can tell you this also came with the various NJR versions. And finally, here are the blades. These don't just fold out, they also extend, and it's pretty slick. But let's get to what you guys really want to see. Here it is in motion. Now, the good news is of course that the basic walking motion of the Masterpiece models has always been superior to the NJR Ligers, which is definitely saying something considering that was already maybe Tomi's best engineered design. My problem here is more that it doesn't really do much else. You kind of have to see it on the display base to really appreciate it. Once you look at it this way, you realize just how much on this Zoid moves. You also notice much more that the head sort of bops up and down as it walks in quite a natural way. I just think it's a bit disappointing that the mouth doesn't do more. Here's a closer look so you can see all those moving details. Towards the end here you can also see that the inside of the chest lights up. And speaking of that, the head also lights up of course, but to be honest it doesn't work that well. I turned off the lights in the photo booth here so you could see it, and it's there, but in daylight conditions you basically don't see it. Yeah, and now for the real gut punch. Here's the Masterpiece Saber Tiger in action, and I'll just let that speak for itself for a moment. I mean, it just doesn't compare, does it? Now, to be fair, the head movement as it growls didn't really work on the Masterpiece Shield Liger at all because the mane would get caught on things and it would get stuck, and no doubt this would have been even more of a problem with the Blade Liger, and maybe that's why I decided to lose it and replace it with the Light Up gimmick instead. So, what do we think? As you can probably tell, it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. By now, I've spent enough time looking at this thing to have gotten used to the proportions, and I certainly do appreciate the overall extra detail, the gorgeous painted blades, and the improved walking movement. I was a big fan of the Masterpiece models when they came out, and just as a display piece, this one has everything I loved about those. It's basically HMM level detail on a motorized Zoid, and that certainly works for me. Plus, you know, just the fact that there's a new batch of motorized Zoids coming from Takara Tomy themselves makes me happy. At the same time though, I think I've also mentioned enough times by now that I'm just not a huge fan of Ligers, and I really would have preferred to see just anything except more Ligers to mark the 40th anniversary of Zoids. And this isn't really anything particularly new, it's just a Masterpiece Zoid with new armor and none of the movement and sound gimmicks. Now, whether that's worth it to you, you'll have to decide for yourselves. I certainly know that the Ligers have a lot of fans out there, and the Masterpiece models are basically impossible to find these days, so don't let a grumpy old fart from the 80s ruin it for you. This is a quality release, it's just not what I would have wanted. Anyway, that's it for this one, folks. If you watched this all the way to the end, you're probably a big fan of Zoids, and I have tons of Zoids content on my channel, so you should probably be subscribing right now. And while you're down there, give this video a like to let the algorithm know what you want to see. I also have PayPal and Patreon links in the description below if you want to help me out with my Zoids budget. Speaking of which, I've got the next 2 Anniversary Ligers on pre-order, and I still need to review the Redler cannons from Kotobukiya, so more is always coming. In the meantime though, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.